Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for Research 411, a talk show focused on sharing best practices and trending research topics delivered by professional staff and prominent UT Dallas researchers from various disciplines. I am Tiffany Willoughby, Program Manager in the Office of Research and Innovation. I will moderate today's discussion. During today's talk show, Dr. Shalini Prasad will share knowledge related to the highly sensitive breath analyzer system and how she partnered with Sotech Health to commercialize and bring the product to market. Dr. Prasad is a Cecil H. and Ida A. Green Professor in Systems Biology and the Department Head of Bioengineering at UT Dallas. Additionally, she is a Fellow of the Society of Laboratory Automation and Screening. Dr. Prasad received her bachelor's in engineering degree from the University of Madras in India in electronics and communication engineering in 2000. She graduated first class with distinction and was awarded a gold medal. Dr. Prasad obtained her PhD degree in electrical engineering in 2004 from the University of California, Riverside. Her PhD research focus was in the area of bio-micro-electromechanical systems and neural microelectrode array interfaces. Dr. Prasad's multidisciplinary PhD dissertation, Development, Application, and Characterization of a Single Cell-Based Sensor, won her the UCR Graduate Student Research Award in 2004. She started her academic research career as a tenure-track assistant professor at Portland State University in December 2004. Subsequently, Dr. Prasad held faculty positions at the ranks of assistant and associate professor at Arizona State University and Wichita State University, prior to joining UT Dallas in 2011 as an associate professor, where she was promoted to full professor in 2015. Her primary scholarly agenda is to develop a research program in on-demand and intelligent biosensing systems through integrating principles of basic and applied sciences and engineering. Dr. Prasad, welcome.
Thank you, Tiffany, for that kind introduction, and I'm really excited to be here with you today.
Thank you, Dr. Prasad. And can you start off today by telling us just a little bit about your research here at the University of Texas at Dallas?
Sure. So my lab here at the University of Texas at Dallas is very much focused on developing next generation sensor technologies. And this is spanning the areas of wearable health, so health-based wearables, going on to environment, the built environment and the natural environment we exist in, and defense applications. And when you come back to healthcare, it's not just sweat, we look at breath, we look at blood, plasma, and all other body fluids as access points towards assessing how we are as individuals and how we can improve our quality of life. So it's really exciting being in my lab. You try to do the next generation tech every single day.
Absolutely. And how about this new device that you have created? We are hearing so much about today.
Wonderful. So let's talk about the new breath analyzer. This is truly an example of engineering innovation done pretty much in a very rapid speed to satisfy the needs of the entire population. What the pandemic has driven us to be is innovate with reducing or collapsing life cycles. So when we started out, it was at the very beginning of the pandemic, so it was right in March. I already had a pre-existing collaboration with Sotech Health. And at that point, we were looking at designing sensors that would be intelligent enough to pick up the presence of explosives and other explosive devices by the fingerprint or that they would give out, which would be a combination of volatile organic compounds. So we were making good headway with that project, and it was translating at a very good keel and a very good clip. Then, of course, COVID happened, and that is when the company decided to pivot, and they said that they wanted to provide a solution that would help manage the pandemic. It became very clear at the very beginning of the pandemic that the number of people getting impacted would be huge. So what we all needed was a highly accessible, easy to use solution that could help us manage the disease, just as a screening tool that would help us figure out if somebody was sick or somebody was healthy. So with that intention in mind, right? So we had to go back to the drawing board and re-engineer what we were doing earlier towards building now out the sensor technology, now not looking for trace volatiles for the IEDs, but looking instead for trace species, which are metabolites in our human breath, that would be very useful towards sorting out between healthy and sick individuals.
That makes perfect sense. And I'm curious to know if you have pivoted back to, or you ran the IED research parallel to this research as well.
So that is is an interesting question. The reason I tell you this is when we started in March of 20, we wanted to be going all guns blazing in all directions, right? So keeping that IED work going as we started ramping on this. So for about 2 quarters, we did both. You know, we were pushing ahead with both. Then it became very clear that once the solution had translated from the lab, so we were able to design the sensor capability to detect and measure and quantify those target species that we were after with the level of precision needed for it to evolve into a breath analyzer. We quickly realized that we would have to spend all our efforts and be dedicating our time towards getting the kinds of data that would be needed to have that statistically significant outcomes, right, from this technology. Because the one thing you would need in terms of proving out the scientific rigor is establishing that what you have is not a one-off or it only works in the lab, but to show that the data you generate can scale and scale to address these large population cohorts that we are interested in monitoring.
Thank you very much for that thorough answer. Now, in still talking about the breath analyzer, can you tell us how it is similar or different to a breathalyzer a police officer would administer to a driver who they believe may be under the influence of alcohol?
Yeah, so exactly, right? As you rightly said, right? So all of us are very well aware of how alcohol breath analyzer works. It is a device in which we blow and in our breath, if we have volatilized alcohol, that basically triggers a simple chemiresistive or an electrochemical reaction inside that device, then that gives out a current signal, which then trips up the whole circuitry to give you then a yes or a no outcome, right? Above a particular threshold, below a particular threshold, and that's how the breath analyzer works. So everyone's familiar with this and everyone's excited, easy enough to use. So we had to model what we were building out to have a very similar usability, design usability, because people are familiar with the alcohol breath analyzer. So here in our breath, instead of looking for alcohol, we are looking for trace metabolites that our respiratory system is putting out when it's impacted by the virus. So the thing here is SARS-CoV-2, the virus, when it impacts the respiratory system, produces a range of volatile organic compounds and inorganic compounds. Other respiratory bugs can also produce certain similar metabolites. So the question here is, you are trying to do fishing and you're fishing for a certain type of fish. So that is what we had to design our sensor to be very sensitive as well as specific to a panel of metabolites that are predominantly expressed as early stage. That is, you get infected by this disease and your body starts to produce it even prior to you perhaps feeling symptoms, or you are asymptomatic. And that is the beauty or the power of a screening tool, because you have the ability then to distinguish what are seemingly healthy people from the actually healthy people. And so once you've separated them out, these people who have tested positive on the breath analyzer, who then have to have follow-on testing with a diagnostic test, which is the molecular test that we are all aware of, putting the swab down our nostril, and it almost touches our brain, and we all almost have the gag reflex. So, and our eyes water, same thing. But you'll have to have the test if you test positive on the breath analyzer. So this is a thing about screening lots of people very quickly with a technology that we can interact with without getting stressed out about.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And I like that you outlined the possible next steps once someone has tested positive using the breath analyzer. Tell us more about that partnership that you previously had or developed with Sotech Health. How did the relationship actually come to fruition?
This is a story of both serendipity and of timing, right? So the Sotech Health CEO is Craig McClitch, and he is a ex-Navy SEAL, and he is very much interested in developing technologies that would impact human health and save his fellow men and women who serve in the armed forces. So that is the vision with which he was scouting multiple technologies around, in fact, the United States, and looking for technologies that are there in universities that are ready to translate out with some investment towards solutions. So that's how he came about and saw the highly sensitive screening technology we had for volatile organic compounds, and he wanted to build out a capability that he could give the military as an opportunity for screening for IEDs and so on. So when he was doing that, the university, on the other hand, was developing this new way of partnering with private companies, which is called the IPA model, which is the intellectual property assignment model. So this is advantageous to company partners because when they come to an academic partner and an academic investigator such as myself, and they want to do a project with us to develop out a technology. And if it's done under the framework of this IPA SRA, then any intellectual property that would come out of this project would be assigned and owned by the company sponsoring the project. Now, this is a big risk mitigation strategy for any startup or any company in terms of the investment they're making in the university. So the timing was serendipitous, but it worked phenomenally well because then came along COVID, and the Sotech wanted to pivot towards finding a solution that could be this mass screening tool. And the IPA SRA model existed, allowing us to develop a tech that we could translate it out to Sotech Health. And they were then able to take the heart of the breath analyzer, which is the electrochemical sensor, and build around it this ecosystem. So which has got this ability to do AI-based backend screening, to be able to do high-end algorithms to assess and track the population. Is it highly densely populated? For example, highly densely populated Dallas County has a higher prevalence rate, vis-a-vis a less dense county has a lower prevalence rate, or vice versa. Or if companies were to use this tech, they want to manage where their employees would go. Maybe it's not safe to go fly into Florida because it's got a higher prevalence rate, vis-a-vis maybe it's better to fly to California because it's got a lower rate. So these are the kinds of decisions that using the breath analyzer is not just a simple screening tool, it's an intelligent screening tool because it can now help with figuring out, right, what's happening and forecasting. So this means you can do a lot of management, not just of the disease, but of your resources, because that's the big problem today with supply chain. So that's the vision with which Sotech say, okay, let's take this thing from this partnership and build this out. And the fact that they could do it in 18 months is because of this fantastic public-private partnership between UTD and Sotech Health.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That was very informative, and it sounds like a very cohesive partnership was developed as well. Now, have you had the opportunity to test the validity of the device?
Absolutely. So this is where that partnership with Sotech Health has been phenomenal. So we, as in UTD, built out the analytical framework for the device. So show that you're detecting these set of molecules. We can do it. We can do it with this level of precision. So kind of like tuning out your car, right? Like, yeah, okay, my car can give me this level of performance. Now you have to go and test whether this car can drive this rugged terrain as advertised, right? So that's the same thing. Can this device now go and be a good screen? So to do that, Sotech Health has done multiple clinical studies. The first study that they did was with Cleveland Clinic out of Abu Dhabi. So where their IRB allowed them to study essentially, the people who work in that hospital, right? Because they had to get tested every single day. So the ability to use this breath analyzer and correlate it to your standard PCR test, right? So that was one of the early studies that provided them information on how to teach their AI to be more effective, to be able to screen people better, to be able to identify those asymptomatic people and the seemingly healthy people. So all of that. After that, Sotech Health has done over 29,000 tests in individuals. And this is the data that forms the crux of their regulatory submissions. And so they're seeking regulatory approval, both in the United States as well as in Europe, to be able to then sell this product. It is almost unheard of that within 18 months, you have basically a lab technology that's now become a product and that is now getting seeking regulatory approval. That kind of accelerated technology development are basically miracles, right? Or stories we like to say, which hopefully become legend. But here at UTD, right, we make it happen every single day. And that's what keeps me so excited about what we do here.
Absolutely. I love it. And once the validity has been tested and it's pushed out to market, where do you envision the screening measure being utilized the most?
Sotech Health has been thinking about, lots of people can benefit from it, from, of course, individuals to businesses. But the more important places are where you're going to have high density of people. So the obvious places are going to be your sporting events, your games. Think about it. We are hitting the holiday season. All of us want to meet family. It's been now last Christmas, no one met anybody. It's been very challenging. Grandma, grandpa can't hug grandkids. And so it's been a big, big problem. So now, whether it's airports or airlines, or whether you think about, sporting events, or whether you think of hotels, all of them, if they have the ability to quickly screen their patrons, their clients coming in, right, and quickly sort them out, because expecting 100,000 people to run a PCR test and have a result in time for boarding a flight or doing that is very challenging because the resources don't allow that to happen. Whereas if you, in the 100,000 people, you identified the 5,000 people who would need follow on testing, then you can meet that timing that we talked about, right? So this is what makes it very exciting. So obviously the first set of people interested would be all travel and gatherings related. So airline, cruise ships, hotels, sporting events. After that would be, of course, institutions of learning, whether it's higher learning like universities, or you're screening in your elementary schools, your K through 12 schools, so what's happening there, because this would be very convenient. Of course, the regulatory approval is for the use in adults, so it would be more, you think, university level settings rather than elementary school settings immediately. And beyond that is, you could envision, depending on whether the supply is there, whether you could make this suitable for individual home use, like you buy and keep it at home, you test yourself every day, and then based on the outcome make decisions. We all already do that, right? We all have bought all those FDA UA approved home saliva kits, and then we're doing all of that, and then we have to go and take a PCR should this thing come out positive. So the same thing is just going to be a lot easier, and your kid could probably even self-administer, because it's just like breathing into a little nozzle. That's what you're doing.
Absolutely. So a question that I am thinking about as you continue to describe the device is when they are put into the community for market and they start to administer them perhaps before a flight, how many devices would they actually need? Or with the device, are you able to slide on a plastic piece that the individual would breathe in and then dispose of it? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It's a very nice, good question. So yes, each of us, think of us, each of us having our own personalized nozzle, right? Think of that, so the little breathing tube. So pretty much like when we go into theaters and we're having the 4D experience, they give us those glasses that we put on, right, for the 3D version of it, and then we toss it off after we are done with that experience. Same idea. You get your little nozzle, you take it with you, you go and plug it into the breath analyzer, breathe into it, then the result is anyway coming out through the app and it's out there to look at, and then you dispose of your tube. So because then the safety aspect is taken care of. I mean, it's your saliva, your breath is not sitting there. It's gone with your little piece and it's been disposed of, right? So the same idea is the way you think about this. It has also opportunities to scale. Instead of a smaller analyzer, you make it a larger analyzer so that you have multiple ports if you have to service a lot of people, right? So like you can put them through this, but that's the idea. You have a disposable piece and you throw it off and you're done.
Perfect. Now, is the device battery powered, or is it something that you can plug in and charge just like a cell phone?
Very much so, yes. So the battery can be recharged. It has got the same way that you would do any of your electronics, your smartphones, your watches, everything else. It's just plugged in, recharges, and reuse. And so battery charges in the time of minutes rather than hours, especially the smaller shapes of these, right, which are a personal handheld breath analyzer systems.
Perfect. Now, do you see this device being useful for detecting more than COVID?
That's the vision, right? So we are in no way unique to looking at COVID. We are looking for a panel of targets that is associated with SARS-CoV-2, the virus for COVID. Very much can be scaled for influenza, respiratory synoviruses, RSV, which impacts the kids. So many of those viral diseases, as well as it can later on be scaled for screening for asthma, COPD, cancer, especially lung cancer, where it's very well known what are the metabolites our body puts out as a disease management tool. And for the infectious diseases, it's more a screening tool because you're identifying the presence. So when I go back to the idea of if this can exist in a school environment, then a kid is coughing, comes in, does the breath test, tests positive, then you send them for a rapid flu test or you do a nasal swab and you run a few tests for the infectious disease, and then you say, okay, this is what the kid has, and then you can isolate the child and so on. So that's the one opportunity. The other is the chronic disease management, right? So person's going through cancer treatments, then you're doing, you've achieved remission, but you want to have management. So you're looking for your baseline levels of these biomarkers and you're continuing to study how that goes, and you can get a daily measurement point, right, rather than that monthly and 3-month checkpoints that you have to go in. I mean, those would still be required, but if you see something, spot some uptick of trends, just as we know when we saw uptick of trends with COVID cases, you have to do something different to address that. So that's the same idea.
Absolutely. Thank you. Now, in a recent article, you are quoted as saying, if the sensor is the brain, Sotech Health had to build the body around that brain. Can you explain that analogy?
Really cool. Yeah. So the brain aspect is, so that's the one that's allowing us gives us the cues of what we have to do. So that's the same thing right here. There's this little sensor which actually measures for those presence of those metabolites and also measures how much they are. But that by itself is not enough, right? Unless you have built an extremely sensitive test that can make sure that it doesn't study anything else in the environment, just that. And it's very tough to build tests like that. So you do have to build other capability that go with that sensor for it to become a valid product or a valuable product, right? So this is where Sotech Health took the inputs from the sensor. They take a bunch of other inputs, right? So that is how you breathe, with what pressure you breathe, what are things like temperature, pressure, humidity, all these various parameters, plus a number of digital markers, right? So these are things that change, like your respiratory rate and things of that nature, and build an AI system around it that is learning all the time and is also then able to use all this data to start predicting, to classify these people, right? Hey, I'm flagging you as being positive on this test, or I'm flagging you as being negative. Initially, when we started it, it is kind of how much resolution do you have? So if a blind person suddenly was able to see a fuzzy picture, they're still happy. But if you see a very clear 20 by 20 picture, then you have no problem in figuring out. You're able to tell the expression of the person and everything else. So that's the idea. We started with that fuzzy picture. We were completely blind. We had just the brain, but we have a completely blind. We went from having a fuzzy picture with just the sensor working to having this whole body built around it with all the AI capability, that now we have this clear 20 by 20 vision that not only can we identify people who are asymptomatic, but we are also able to track with this breath analyzer the upswing and downswings in the amount of metabolic outputs that this disease is putting out, right? So they do what is known as longitudinal studies, just tracking people over time during disease course to see how the responses are on the breath analyzer. All of this gives a lot of data for doing big data analytics, for doing these predictive things, as you said, right? I'm a company with 200,000 employees, 20,000 of them are in California, 20,000 of them are in Florida. Do I get these two people to travel between these two sites? Do I still keep them virtual? When do I get them to start interacting? All of this, from what the brain gives you only individual data points, but that whole body helps you understand the entire picture.
That is correct, and that is amazing. One question that I have for you, and I don't believe we've covered it, and I apologize if you have. We've talked so much about the device, and now we're talking about the data that is collected. Can you tell us where the data goes to, and do individuals who test on the device have the opportunity to view their own data, and if so, how?
Right. So it depends on how the nature of the test is set up. So if it is done in a clinical environment, there is a request not for the patient not to see that data, especially when you're doing trials, right? So because to keep everything de-identified, so the patient shouldn't have the opportunity to see it at that point, because they want to do the back-end correlated test with the molecular test, right? So if that is the case, in those instances, the opportunity to just hide the output is possible. But in reality, if you're running the test, you should be able to see it. There's an app associated with the device that pairs with the device, just as like your smartwatch pairs with your smartphone. Same idea, right? Your device pairs to your phone, on which you have the app. You open the app, and then you say, run the test. At which point, this device does internal check to see it is working the way it's supposed to work, and it gives out a signal or a light that says ready to test. At which point, you put your nozzle in and blow into it, and it has like a countdown clock that tells you that you've blown sufficient, and then tells you to stop, and then the output is presented to that through the app. So you'll know immediately whether it's a positive test or a negative test. There's also a QR code associated with it that lets you then take that information, like how today when we have vaccines, they tell you get all the information, right? So you're able to show the QR code, like if you're going to be able to scan through like a airport checking system and so on and so forth, right? So there's a QR code that's associated. All data is protected by HIPAA compliance. So it is done in double encrypted, it's in the cloud, and the company manages this right now. The entire backend has to be, even for regulatory approval, right? So you have to make sure that all of this is meeting. So this is all the work that the company did. It's not something that I as an academic lab can do, but being a partner and watching them do it, so it has been a lot of effort to make sure, because two things people care about: safety and compliance, right? So they want, and privacy, the privacy associated with the data, because it's their data. So these are things that this is satisfied by this capability.
Thank you, Dr. Prasad. And I understand that UT Dallas and the Office of Research and Innovation have been able to support you and your research, and then, of course, the partnership with Sotech as well. Do you have any advice for faculty, researchers on developing those partnerships with other individuals?
Partnerships require time, and partnerships are like, plants. You have to nurture them, you have to grow them. Now, UTD Office of Research and Innovation has a lot of resources, both people resources as well as information itself. Now, we all as academic researchers understand federal funding, state funding mechanisms. This is very unusual because this is a public-private partnership. So the money actually most likely, even though it might come from a private company, perhaps is venture cap money, other kinds of money that is invested, private equity money. So there are very strict deliverables typically associated with contracts when are designed to support. So the PIs should have the awareness that it is a contract deliverable system. So we need to be able to show with clear transparency what work we have done, what the metrics are, and the timelines can generally be very aggressive and rigorous. But the other aspect that academic PIs do need to understand is that if you do the IPA model, you are assigning eventually the ownership right of the intellectual property to that company. Now, that's not a bad thing, because there are clauses in which there is royalty returns, bunch of other things, right? Because ultimately we do one part of it, but to truly take that idea that we have developed in the lab to something that is a product requires so much more investment and so many resources coming together. But you can learn about that if you're curious about it and that excites you. This is a very good opportunity to see how quickly you can translate lab ideas into something that's meaningful and that has impact on human life without maybe having to wait till we are dead and gone and whether we get awarded a Nobel Prize or not. I mean, so this is a very nice way to see the impact of our work very quickly.
Thank you, Dr. Prasad. Now, I've taken some of the audience questions and I have interjected them previously, but I do have a few in the queue for you, and they are related to whether or not the device needs to be cleaned or maintenance. Have you thought about those types of situations? How will you address them when the product is in market?
Yeah, so there are two ways of implementing the device. The most obvious way is that the device itself has that durable part, which has got the brain and the environment built around the breath analyzer ecosystem. So your nozzle that you're putting in to breathe into it, that you use and you toss. So then you clean the device itself with basically an alcohol wipe, and it's ready for the next test. It is a one-way valve, so there's no backward pressure, so breath doesn't come. So there's a lot of testing that was done by the company to ensure, because this is data they have to show that that you don't have contamination of the actual sensor surface. The sensor itself heats up, so this makes sure that whatever was there in that immediate environment pretty much is broken down, right? So they had lots of sampling tests done to ensure that there is no active live virus left behind on that sensor, right? Which is the main concern that people would have from a safety perspective. So that's why the idea of doing an alcohol wipe and reusing the next thing is something we do now almost because we're using alcohol wipes everywhere, right? We are wiping our hands, we are wiping dishes, we are wiping our books, we are wiping our computers. So Yes, that's all it would be.
Thank you, Dr. Prasad. And Dr. Prasad, I want to thank you for joining us today. Audience members, if you enjoyed today's talk show, please suggest it to a friend. And to view a full list of Office of Research and Innovation events, please visit our webpage, research.utdallas.edu. Thank you and have a nice afternoon.